Hi, do you know the name of the empire that Alexander the Great built? Unlike the Roman Empire or the British Empire, most people just call it the Empire of Alexander the Great. Then, which do you think is the perfect name for the empire among the following? Hellenic, Hellenistic, Macedonian, Alexandrian. Before you choose your answer, let me just talk a little bit about the period of classical antiquity. In general, classical era refers to the period of ancient Greece and the Roman Empire as a part of Western history. The Greco-Roman legacy created a kind of cultural sphere where people share customs and traditions throughout history. At this point, I would like to suggest that we should not confine the meaning of classical only to the regions surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. That is because other world regions also saw a similar formation of extensive and long-lasting culture during this period. Moreover, strong empires mediated diffusion of culture in the same manner. In this regard, I'm going to introduce the third period in world history, classical antiquity, by talking about parallels that a culture sphere developed in leading civilizations. Let's go back to the question about the name of Alexander's empire. Hellenic indicates ancient Greece before Alexander the Great. Macedonia became an empire in the reign of Alexander the Great. He had no sooner died than the empire collapsed. So Macedonia had just a short imperial period. Greek culture and language continued to flourish in the former territories of the empire, and it was the Hellenistic period. Therefore, I think it's safe to call it the Macedonian or Alexandrian Empire. But most people just call it the Empire of Alexander the Great. Greek culture evolved and culminated in the Roman Empire for a millennium. Rome rose from a small kingdom to a republic and finally became an empire. At the end of the 4th century, the empire was divided into the Western and Eastern halves. The Western Empire soon fell, and the European mainland became a dynamic stage for struggle and competition among various peoples. The Eastern Empire lasted 1,000 more years by checking the expansion of their hostile neighbors. Its identity, based on Greek culture and Orthodox Christianity, gave the empire another name, the Byzantine Empire. While Greece and the Roman Empire established the backbone of culture in the West, another classical era began in China. Just like Alexander the Great, Qin Shi Huang unified China for the first time in history, and his empire rapidly collapsed after his death. It was the Han Dynasty who played the role of Roman Empire in creating cultural unity. Even today, the name of Han represents the comprehensive identity of China. Chinese script and the major ethnic group of China share the name of the Han Dynasty. The Han Empire lasted for about 400 years. After this dynasty, collective consciousness for unification continued to exist throughout Chinese history. Also, classical Chinese culture had a great influence on East Asia, especially Korea and Japan. In the Middle East, it was Arab Muslims who finally established political power and classical culture. At first, Iranian inhabitants built empires in the former region of the Persian Empire, such as the Parthian Empire and the Sasanian Empire. Arabs used to be silent, nomadic neighbors to them. However, the rise of Islam in the later years of classical antiquity was sudden and unstoppable. The Prophet Muhammad directed the conquest of the Arabian Peninsula, and his followers expanded their sacred territories over the Middle East, Central Asia, Northern Africa, and part of Southern Europe. Given the great influence on those regions throughout history and even today, there is no reason we cannot describe the legacy of this period as classical. Finally, the creators of Indian classical culture were not the founders of the ancient civilization in that reason. In my previous video on ancient empires, I barely covered politics in India because Indo-Aryan immigrants were gradually expanding throughout the Indian subcontinent. These dominant peoples developed the Vedic culture, which emphasized the priesthood of Brahman and the distinction of social classes. This was Brahmanism, also known as Proto-Hinduism. At the end of the Vedic period, opposing ideas appeared, such as Buddhism and Jainism. Regarding Indian classical antiquity, I need to name three important empires. First, the Mauryan Empire completed the first unification. The famous king Ashoka once was a brutal conqueror, but he accepted Buddhism and his empire helped the faith spread across and beyond India. Second, the Kushan was a foreign dynasty to the Indian natives, but they played a pivotal role in cultural development. I remember from my high school history class that there was a famous Buddha statue in Korea. This Korean national treasure was known to be inspired by the art of India in this period. Third, during the time of the Gupta Empire, Hinduism evolved from ancient Brahmanism and became a macro culture, which is still dominant in India. Unity in diversity is a keyword describing the Indian culture. This aspect is mainly rooted in the achievement of the Gupta era. Alright, in summary, we can discover a similar pattern in the formation of classical culture globally. Once ancient philosophy and religion arose, a strong empire disseminates them. As a result, its political range becomes a cultural sphere which lasts after the fall of the empire. Not only that, these occurrences overlapped in time in Europe, West Asia, India, and China. Exceptionally, the Islam world appeared a bit later time. This is what happened in the period of classical antiquity. If you have any suggestion, please leave your comment. Thank you for watching.